Emily Carter woke up early that morning before the sun had even risen. The city was still quiet, but her small apartment was already filled with the sounds of the day beginning. She could hear the faint hum of cars starting on the street below, and the distant chatter of neighbors preparing for their own busy day. She stretched and sighed, feeling the familiar weight of tiredness on her shoulders. Life had never been easy for Emily. At 25 years old, she was juggling two jobs and carrying a lot of responsibility, not just for herself, but also for her younger brother, Jake. Emily lived in a modest neighborhood on the edge of downtown Chicago. Her apartment wasn't much, just a small one-bedroom on the third floor of an old building, but it was home. She shared it with Jake, who was only 13, but wise beyond his years. Since their mother had passed away years ago, Emily had been both sister and mother to Jake. She took on the role without complaint, even if it meant long hours and little rest. That morning, Emily quickly got ready for her shift at the cafe where she worked. The cafe was a cozy little place, tucked between tall office buildings, filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked pastries. It was the kind of place where office workers stopped by for their morning caffeine fix, and locals gathered for quiet afternoons. Emily liked the cafe, even if it was sometimes overwhelming. She enjoyed the small smiles from regular customers and the rush of the busy hours. But most days, she felt the strain of balancing the physical work with the emotional weight of her life. As she walked the few blocks to the cafe, Emily tried to push aside the worries that often followed her around like shadows. Bills, rent, school supplies for Jake. The list never seemed to end. But today, she promised herself, she would try to focus on the little things that made her happy. A kind word from a customer, a funny story overheard from a table, or even the feeling of the warm sun on her face during her brief breaks. When Emily arrived at the cafe, it was already starting to fill up. The morning rush was always the busiest time. People came in quick, ordering their coffees and breakfast sandwiches, sometimes in a hurry, sometimes lingering to chat. Emily greeted each one with a smile, pouring steaming cups of coffee, refilling creamers, and balancing trays with practiced ease. She loved the rhythm of it. The steady flow of people and tasks kept her mind busy. Among the usual crowd, there was one man who caught her attention. He was older, probably in his late 50s or early 60s, and always impeccably dressed in expensive suits that seemed a little out of place in the casual cafe setting. His hair was silver, neatly combed, and his presence had a quiet confidence that made people glance his way. The staff whispered about him when he wasn't around, guessing he was a billionaire or some kind of important businessman, but Emily didn't think much of it. He was just another customer, after all, and she was too busy to be curious. The man came in every morning around the same time, usually ordering a simple black coffee and a croissant. He sat by the window, reading the newspaper or typing on his laptop. Emily noticed that he was polite but quiet, nodding to the staff but never joining in conversations. Sometimes she caught him staring out the window as if lost in thought. There was something mysterious about him, but Emily respected his privacy. On this particular day, as Emily moved between tables, refilling drinks and taking orders, she felt the usual exhaustion creep in. Her feet ached, and her voice was hoarse, from calling out orders. Still, she pushed through, reminding herself that she was doing this for Jake, to give him a better life, to keep a roof over their heads. She thought about the upcoming school year and the clothes and books Jake would need. Every dollar mattered. Just as the morning rush began to slow down, Emily noticed the man standing up quickly, gathering his belongings in a rush. In his hurry, he accidentally left behind a wallet on the table. Emily's eyes widened as she saw it lying there, so out of place in the busy cafe. She picked it up carefully, feeling the weight of it in her hands. It was a thick leather wallet, worn but clearly expensive. Curiosity mixed with a sense of responsibility. Emily looked around to see if the man had noticed, but he was already halfway out the door, blending into the crowd outside. She knew she had to catch him before he left, but the street was crowded. Taking a deep breath, she decided to hold on to the wallet and wait for him to come back. Minutes passed, and the cafe began to fill with the lunch crowd. Emily's thoughts kept drifting back to the wallet. She wondered who this man really was, and why he seemed so different from everyone else who came through the cafe. Part of her wanted to peek inside, but she hesitated. It wasn't her place. But when no one came to claim it, curiosity got the better of her. Slowly, she opened the wallet, careful not to damage anything inside. There were several cards, credit cards with logos from big banks, an ID card, and then a small folded photograph tucked into a hidden pocket. Emily pulled it out and gasped softly. The photograph was old and faded, but the woman in it looked incredibly familiar. She studied the face. Soft eyes, a gentle smile, and a deep feeling rose in her chest. It was her mother. Emily's heart pounded. How could this be? She had never seen this picture before. She held it tightly, blinking back tears. Her mother had died when Emily was just a little girl, and the memories were few and scattered. Seeing that photo in a stranger's wallet felt like a puzzle piece had suddenly shifted. Who was this man? And why did he have her mother's picture? Emily's mind raced with questions. She wanted to ask, to understand, but the man had left. She didn't know what to do next. She carefully folded the photo back into the wallet and placed it in her apron pocket, hoping she could find him again. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Emily kept stealing glances at the door, hoping the man would come back. When he finally did, she hesitated but called out to him softly, "Sir, you left your wallet." He turned, surprised, and walked back to her table. Emily handed him the wallet, watching his face closely. His eyes met hers, and for a moment there was something unreadable in his expression. Surprise, sadness, or maybe regret. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice calm but carrying a weight Emily couldn't place. Then, almost hesitantly, she asked, "Where did you get this photo?" Her voice shook a little. The man's eyes flickered and he looked away, as if struggling with his emotions. "It's a long story," he said softly. "Maybe one day I'll tell you." Emily didn't know what to think. The encounter left her with more questions than answers. As he left the cafe, she felt tears prick at her eyes, but also a strange flicker of hope. Maybe this man held a secret about her mother, a secret that could change everything. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt the weight of her hard life lift, even just a little. The day had started like any other, but now it felt like the beginning of something new, something she wasn't ready to understand yet but couldn't ignore. Emily felt the weight of the wallet heavy in her apron pocket as the morning rush died down at the cafe. The photo she had seen inside haunted her thoughts. Her mother's face, soft and familiar, looked back at her with a gentle smile, frozen in time. It was a side of her mother Emily had never seen before. Since her mother had passed away when Emily was just a little girl, she only had a few faded memories. No photos like this one, and certainly not one tucked away in a stranger's wallet. She sat behind the counter during a rare quiet moment, her fingers tracing the edges of the photo, as if hoping to touch her mother again through the paper. Her heart pounded with a mix of excitement and fear. What did this mean? Who was this man? And why did he carry her mother's picture? Was there a connection between them that Emily never knew about? Her mind raced with questions, but she knew she had to be careful. She wasn't sure if the man was dangerous or kind, rich or poor, friend or foe. The man seemed calm and quiet when he came to the cafe, but this small photo hinted at a story far bigger than Emily had ever imagined. Time passed slowly as Emily worked the rest of her shift, but her thoughts never left the photo. She carefully folded it back and slid it into the wallet, which she still kept hidden in her apron pocket. She didn't want anyone else to see it. This was her secret. For now. After her shift ended, Emily hurried outside into the bright afternoon sun. She had promised Jake she would pick him up from school on time. As she walked, her mind kept drifting back to the wallet and the woman in the photo. Who was she really? Was it possible that the man who owned the wallet knew more about her mother than Emily did? The thought filled her with hope, but also with fear. That evening, Emily sat at their small kitchen table with Jake, trying to focus on the simple dinner she had made. Jake chatted happily about his day at school, but Emily's heart wasn't in it. She kept glancing at the wallet hidden safely in her bag on the floor beside her. She wasn't sure what to do with it yet. After dinner, while Jake was doing his homework in the next room, Emily took out the wallet again. She opened it slowly, and once more, her eyes were drawn to the photograph. She studied every detail: the woman's eyes, her smile, the way her hair framed her face. It was her mother, but younger, happier, full of life. The woman Emily had known in her memories was fragile and tired in the photos she had seen before. Emily's fingers trembled as she turned the wallet over. There were several cards inside, all with fancy logos and names she didn't recognize. Bank cards, membership cards, and the man's identification. She carefully pulled out the ID card and looked at the name: Richard Alton. The photo on the card was the same man who came to the cafe. Older, with silver hair and sharp eyes. The name sounded familiar, but Emily couldn't place it. She wondered if anyone else at the cafe knew who he was. She had heard the staff whisper rumors about a mysterious billionaire who had recently moved into the city, but she had never paid much attention. Now everything seemed connected. Emily's mind was spinning. She thought about calling someone, maybe a friend or even the police. But something told her to hold back. This was personal. She needed to know more before she made any decisions. That night, Emily barely slept. The photograph haunted her dreams, and the man's quiet face kept appearing in her thoughts. She imagined him telling her a story about her mother, about secrets hidden for years, about a family she never knew she had. The next morning, Emily was back at the cafe, her heart pounding with nerves. She hoped the man would come back, that she could ask him about the photo. When he arrived, she noticed that he seemed even quieter than usual. He sat at his usual table by the window, ordering his black coffee but barely touching it. When the cafe quieted again, Emily approached him carefully. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. "Sir," she said softly, "I found your wallet yesterday. You left it here." The man looked up, surprise flashing across his face. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I was careless." Then he paused, studying Emily closely, as if seeing her for the first time. Emily took a deep breath and asked, "Can I ask you something?" "About the photo inside your wallet." "The woman. She looks like my mother." The man's face changed. For a moment his eyes filled with sadness and something Emily couldn't name. He looked away, as if struggling to find the right words. Finally he said, "Yes, that's Margaret. She was very important to me." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "You knew her?" He nodded slowly. "We were close. A long time ago." Emily wanted to ask more, but she felt unsure. How much should she trust this stranger? The man took a deep breath and said, "If you want, I can tell you everything. But it's not an easy story." Emily felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. After all these years, here was a chance to learn the truth about her mother, about the family she never knew she had. She nodded, unable to speak. The man smiled sadly and said, "Let's sit down. I'll tell you." They moved to a quiet corner of the cafe, away from the busy tables and curious eyes. The man introduced himself properly as Richard Alton and began to share his story, a story filled with love, loss, and secrets that had been hidden for years. Richard told Emily how he had met Margaret in the early 1990s. She was young, full of life, and unlike anyone he had ever met. They fell in love quickly but lived in different worlds. He, a businessman building an empire, and she, an artist struggling to find her place. Their relationship was intense but complicated. One day Margaret disappeared without a word. Richard searched for her but found nothing. Years later, he discovered she had given birth to a daughter. He didn't know it was Emily until now. Emily listened, her heart breaking and swelling all at once. She asked questions, each answer revealing more pieces of a puzzle she had lived with her whole life. Richard explained why he never contacted Emily before. Margaret had begged him to stay away, to protect Emily from dangers connected to his business. It had been a painful decision, but he respected her wishes, until now. The conversation lasted for hours. Emily learned things she never expected. About her mother's strength, about the sacrifices she made, and about the man who had loved her deeply, but had been kept away. When the cafe finally closed, Emily felt a mixture of emotions: sadness, relief, hope, and confusion. She thanked Richard for trusting her with the story and promised to think about what she had learned. As she walked home that night, the city lights shining around her, Emily felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change. After the quiet afternoon at the cafe, when Richard Alton had shared some pieces of his story, Emily's mind was swirling with emotions. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a vast ocean, deep, unknown, and full of mystery. The more she learned about Richard and her mother, Margaret, the more questions filled her heart. But what stunned her most was the thought that Richard, this powerful and quiet man, could be her biological father. It was a truth that felt almost too big to hold. Emily spent the next few days in a strange mix of disbelief and hope. She kept thinking about Richard's words and the way his eyes looked when he talked about Margaret. There was pain, regret, and something soft, a tenderness that made Emily wonder if he really cared. But she also felt anger that she had been kept in the dark for so long. Why had no one told her the truth? Why had she grown up without knowing her real father? Why had her mother kept such a big secret? She didn't have answers yet, and she knew she had to find them. Emily decided to meet Richard again. She needed to know everything. The truth, no matter how hard it might be, was the only thing that could bring peace. They arranged to meet at a quiet coffee shop, one where they could talk without interruption. When Emily arrived, Richard was already there, waiting. He looked older than she remembered, with more lines around his eyes and a tiredness that spoke of many years of burden. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. Emily nodded. "I want to understand. About my mother. About you. About everything." Richard took a deep breath. "I understand. I want to tell you everything." He began with the story of how he and Margaret had met in the early 1990s. Richard was a young businessman then, full of dreams and ambition. Margaret was an artist, free-spirited and kind-hearted. Their worlds were very different, but somehow they found each other. They had fallen in love quickly, deeply, but their relationship was complicated. Richard was building his business empire, often traveling and working long hours. Margaret was trying to live a simple life, away from the stress and noise. Sometimes their differences created distance between them. Then, one day, Margaret disappeared. Richard told Emily how he searched for her, desperate and lost. He looked everywhere, calling friends, checking hospitals, even hiring private investigators. But she was gone, leaving no trace. For years he didn't know why she had left or where she had gone. Then, years later, Richard discovered something that changed everything. Margaret had given birth to a daughter, the daughter he never knew he had. That daughter was Emily. Hearing this, Emily felt a mixture of shock and disbelief. She wanted to ask more questions but struggled to find the words. How could this be true? Richard reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, worn photograph of Margaret holding a baby. "This is the only picture I have of her with the child," he said quietly. "I never knew the baby's name. I never knew what happened to her." Emily took the photo carefully, her fingers trembling. Seeing her mother with a baby, she felt a sudden rush of emotions, love, sadness, and a deep longing she had never known. Richard continued, explaining why he had stayed away all these years. Margaret had begged him not to contact her or the child, saying it was for their safety. She was afraid of the dangers connected to Richard's business. She wanted to protect Emily from the risks that came with his powerful enemies. Emily was overwhelmed. It was hard to believe that her mother had kept such a secret, not because of shame, but to protect her. And it was hard to believe that Richard had respected that decision, even though it had cost him dearly. "But why didn't you try to find me sooner?" Emily asked, her voice breaking. Richard looked down, ashamed. "I was afraid that my presence would bring danger to you, and I didn't know where to start. But now, I want to be part of your life if you'll let me." The words hung in the air between them. Emily wasn't sure what to say. Part of her wanted to run away, to pretend none of this was real, but part of her felt a deep, unspoken need to know her father, to understand her past. For days after their meeting, Emily couldn't stop thinking about Richard's story. She talked to Jake about it carefully, trying to explain that sometimes families were complicated, but love was still there. Jake listened quietly, his young eyes wide with curiosity. Emily also reached out to her aunt, who had raised her after their mother's death. Her aunt was hesitant at first, but finally admitted she knew more than she had told Emily. She explained that Margaret had asked her to keep the secret to protect Emily. The aunt had promised, and had never broken it. This revelation was bittersweet. Emily was grateful for her aunt's honesty, but also hurt that the truth had been hidden for so long. Emily decided to take things slowly. She wasn't ready to jump into a new relationship with Richard, but she wanted to keep talking. She wanted to build trust and understand what it meant to have a father after all these years. Richard was patient and kind, never pushing, but always present. He shared stories about his life, his regrets, and his hopes. He asked about Emily's life, her dreams, and her fears. One day, Richard invited Emily to visit his home, a large but warm house filled with art and books. Emily was nervous but agreed. When she arrived, she saw a side of Richard she hadn't seen before. He wasn't just a billionaire. He was a man who had lived a life full of mistakes and moments of kindness. They spent the afternoon talking, laughing, and sharing memories. Emily realized that family wasn't just about blood, but about connection, trust, and love. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Richard continued to build their relationship slowly. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt and pain, but there were also moments of hope and joy. Emily kept the photo of her mother in her room, a reminder of the past and a symbol of new beginnings. She understood now that the truth, no matter how difficult, could heal old wounds and open the door to a future filled with possibility. After the slow, cautious steps Emily had taken toward Richard, their relationship began to grow in ways she had never expected. What started as small, uncertain meetings turned into a steady presence in her life, a presence that both comforted and challenged her. Emily found herself caught between the life she had known and the new world Richard opened before her, full of possibilities and questions. At first, Emily struggled to believe that a man like Richard, a billionaire with a vast and complicated life, could truly care about someone like her. She came from a modest background, raised on love and sacrifice but with no luxuries or wealth. The contrast between their worlds was enormous, and sometimes it made her feel out of place. Yet Richard never made her feel like an outsider. Instead, he showed a quiet kindness and a genuine desire to connect. Their conversations were deep and honest. Richard told her about the challenges he had faced building his business empire, the pressure, the betrayals, and the loneliness that often came with great success. He spoke openly about his regrets, especially about the years lost with Emily and the secrets that had kept them apart. Emily listened, feeling a mixture of sympathy and sadness. She realized that even the richest people carried heavy burdens. One afternoon, Richard invited Emily to visit the family estate outside the city. The estate was large and surrounded by beautiful gardens, a world apart from the small apartment Emily shared with Jake. As they walked through the lush greenery, Emily felt a strange mix of awe and discomfort. This place was so different from everything she had ever known, yet Richard's warm smile made it feel less intimidating. They sat on a bench overlooking a peaceful lake, and Richard began to share more about Margaret, Emily's mother. He spoke of her passion for art, her kindness, and the difficult choices she had made to protect her daughter. Emily felt tears welling up as she heard stories that painted her mother as a brave and loving woman, not just the distant figure in her childhood memories. Richard also explained why Margaret had kept her distance from him after Emily was born. She feared that the dangerous people connected to Richard's business could harm her child. It was a protective choice, made with love but at great cost. Emily understood now that her mother's silence had been an act of sacrifice, not rejection. Over time, Emily and Richard's relationship grew stronger. They shared dinners, walked through the city, and slowly built a bridge between the past and the present. Richard was patient, never rushing but always present. Emily began to see him not just as a stranger or a wealthy businessman, but as a man who wanted to be part of her life. However, the path was not without obstacles. Emily struggled with feelings of anger and betrayal. How could her mother keep such a secret? Why had Richard not found her sooner? These questions haunted her, and sometimes she felt overwhelmed. One day, Emily confronted Richard. "Why didn't you try harder to find me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why did it take so long?" Richard looked at her with deep sorrow. "I did try, but your mother asked me to stay away. She believed it was the best way to protect you. I respected her wishes, even though it hurt me deeply. I wanted to be in your life, but I didn't want to put you in danger." Emily nodded, understanding the pain behind his words. It wasn't easy to forgive the lost years, but she was beginning to see the love that had been there all along. Their relationship grew. Emily introduced Richard to Jake. The boys were different in many ways. Jake was shy and quiet, while Richard carried himself with confidence and experience. But to Emily's surprise, they got along well. Richard treated Jake with kindness and respect, and Jake warmed up to the idea of having a father figure in his life. Emily also introduced Richard to her aunt, the woman who had raised her after her mother's death. At first, the aunt was cautious, unsure if she could trust Richard. But after seeing his sincere efforts to connect, she softened and welcomed him. Despite the progress, Emily's life remained complicated. She still worked 2 jobs to support Jake and herself. Richard offered help, but Emily was determined to be independent. She didn't want to feel like she owed anyone anything. One evening, after a long day, Emily and Richard sat in her small apartment. The contrast between their worlds was clear. The modest furniture and simple decor against Richard's stories of luxury and business. Yet, in that small space, they found comfort in each other's company. Richard opened up about his fears. "I don't want to lose you again," he said quietly. "I know I made mistakes, but I want to be here for you and Jake. I want to make up for lost time." Emily reached out and took his hand. "I want that too," she said softly. "But we have to take it one step at a time." Their journey was far from perfect. There were moments of doubt, arguments, and tears. But through it all, they found strength in their growing bond. One day, Richard surprised Emily with a gift, a small, framed painting. It was a portrait of Margaret, created by an artist who had known her well. The painting captured Margaret's spirit, the kindness in her eyes, and the warmth of her smile. Emily was deeply touched. The gift was more than just a picture. It was a connection to her mother, a reminder that she was loved and remembered. As the months passed, Emily's life began to change. She found new confidence and hope. Richard's support gave her the chance to dream bigger, to imagine a future where she and Jake didn't have to struggle alone. Emily enrolled in night classes to finish her education, determined to build a better life. Richard encouraged her every step of the way, proud of her determination and strength. The bond between Emily and Richard grew deeper, built on trust, forgiveness, and love. Emily learned that family wasn't just about blood but about the people who stood by you through thick and thin. One evening, as they sat together watching the sun set, Emily felt a peace she hadn't known before. The journey had been difficult, filled with pain and uncertainty, but it had led her to a place of hope and new beginnings. She looked at Richard and smiled. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." Richard smiled back, his eyes filled with warmth. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Their story was far from over, but they faced the future together, stronger, united, and ready for whatever came next. After months of slowly building trust and learning about each other, Emily and Richard found themselves standing at the edge of a new chapter in their lives. The journey they had taken, from strangers connected by a secret photo to a family, learning to be together, had been filled with challenges, surprises, and deep emotions. Now they faced the future with hope, but also the reality that healing and change take time. Emily's life was different now. With Richard's support, she had begun to explore opportunities she had never dreamed of. She enrolled in college classes, working hard to finish her education and open doors for a better future. Jake, too, was adjusting to this new reality, slowly warming up to the idea of having a father figure who cared deeply for both of them. Despite these positive changes, life was not without its difficulties. Emily still struggled with the memories of her childhood, growing up without her mother, the loneliness, and the years spent wondering about her family. Some days, the weight of the past felt too heavy to bear. But now, she had Richard by her side, someone who understood the pain and wanted to help carry the burden. Richard, for his part, was learning what it meant to be a father after so many years away. It wasn't easy. He had to earn Emily's trust every day and be patient with Jake, who needed time to feel safe and comfortable. But Richard was committed. He wanted to make up for lost time and show them both that family could be a place of love and support. One important step in their journey was opening up to others. Emily and Richard knew that their story wasn't just theirs. It involved family, friends, and the people who cared about them. Emily introduced Richard to her closest friends who welcomed him warmly. She also reconnected with distant relatives who had been curious about her past. Richard's business life was also becoming a part of Emily's world. She began to understand the pressures and complexities he faced as a billionaire with responsibilities that reached far beyond their small family. Richard made sure to protect Emily and Jake from the darker sides of his world, but sometimes the demands were unavoidable. Through it all, Emily remained grounded by her own strength and determination. She balanced school, work, and her growing relationship with Richard with grace. Jake thrived too, excelling in school and making new friends, supported by the love around him. One day Richard surprised Emily with a visit to a place important, to Margaret, the art studio where she had worked and created. The studio was filled with paintings and sketches that revealed the woman Margaret had been, passionate, talented, and full of life. Emily felt a deep connection to her mother there, as if the walls themselves held her spirit. They spent hours exploring the studio, talking about Margaret's dreams and struggles. Richard shared stories of their time together, and Emily realized how much her mother had sacrificed for her safety and happiness. Tears came easily, but so did smiles and laughter, as they celebrated the memory of the woman who had brought them together. With each passing day, Emily grew more confident in her new life. She finished her college courses with honors and began applying for jobs that matched her dreams. Richard was proud, cheering her on every step of the way. Their relationship deepened, built on honesty, respect, and love. They learned to forgive the past and embrace the present, creating a family bonded not only by blood but by choice. Emily and Richard also found joy in small, everyday moments: family dinners, quiet walks, and simple talks late into the night. These moments reminded them that happiness often comes in the little things. However, the past was never far away. Challenges sometimes arose, testing their resolve. There were people from Richard's business world who didn't approve of their relationship and old wounds that surfaced unexpectedly. But together, Emily and Richard faced these obstacles, growing stronger in their commitment. One of the most meaningful moments came when Emily introduced Richard and Jake to a community center where she volunteered. The center was a place of hope for many, offering support and friendship. Richard was moved by the work being done there and promised to help support their efforts. This act of giving back became a symbol of their new beginning, a way to honor Margaret's memory and build a better future. As the years passed, Emily and Richard's bond became unbreakable. They shared holidays, birthdays, and celebrations with a new family of friends and loved ones. Jake grew into a confident young man, proud of his family's story and the love that had brought them together. Emily often thought about the day she found her mother's photo in Richard's wallet, the moment that changed everything. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into a journey of discovery, healing, and hope. She realized that life is full of unexpected twists and turns, and sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most beautiful destinations. With Richard and Jake by her side, Emily looked forward to the future with an open heart and a spirit full of courage. Together they had created a story of love that would last forever.